Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson and Douglas Mackenzie here again to chat to one of our cronies from around the Burns world. Hi Jim, how you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody.
Tonight, folks, our guest is someone who's done some great work in the Dumfries area to bring the heritage of Burns more up to date and to give you something to enjoy every time you visit Dumfries. Tonight, folks, please welcome Professor David Thomson.
Thank you very much, Dougie, and hi again, Jim. Nice to meet you again. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
That's great. Thanks very much. Hope the weather's been nice to you down in Dumfries.
Well, actually, I'm not in Dumfries. I'm at my other home in Oxfordshire. So it's that's where my main business is based. So I spend a bit more than half my time down here and the other half in the Dumfries area. So I'm very lucky, I'm very privileged to be able to do both these things.
Good for you. No doubt we'll hear more about that when you tell us a little bit about yourself, which is always the first question that we ask.
Okay, well, my name's David Thompson. I was born in Dumfries in 1954. And I suppose if I look back at my sort of Dumfries heritage, and certainly on my mum's side of the family, it goes back a very long way, actually. And I don't know if anyone knows the geography of Dumfries very well, but there was a place in Dumfries called Nith Place, and two of my great-grandfathers had shops in Nith Place. One was John Lockerbie. He was a pharmacist, and he was the provost of Dumfries during the Second World War. And the other one was William Thompson, my other great-grandfather, one of my other great-grandfathers from my paternal side of my family. And he was a stationer and printer. And they're both interesting guys because William Thompson was originally from Blantyre in Lanarkshire, and he'd gone out, he was a printer, and he went out to Africa, to what was then British Central Africa, and he was printing Bibles, I think, presumably for the Church of Scotland mission out there, and that's where my grandfather, Tommy Thompson, was born in the late 1890s. So educated at Dumfries Academy, and eventually I went to Strathclyde University, where I studied food science, largely food chemistry, really. And I graduated from there in 1976, and I went to work in England at that point. That's when I really, I suppose, moved out of Scotland on a sort of longish term basis. I went to work in Cambridge for a year, didn't much enjoy it, if I'm honest with you. So I decided to go back to university, and I went to Bristol University to do a PhD. And it was in an area called consumer sensory science, or sensory psychology, whichever you like to call it. It's a very new area in these days, and I've never looked back, really. It was something I truly enjoyed then, and I truly enjoy now. And it's where I met my wife Teresa, and after I was there for almost 4 years, I went to Reading University, and I worked there for 8 years as a lecturer, teaching the students about sensory measurement, about what influences people's purchasing behaviour, and things like that. Everything really all to do. It was very much targeted at the food industry, and then in probably in 1989, I decided that although I really enjoyed the academic life, I didn't think I could see myself there at 65. So I got the opportunity really to branch out and start my own company called MMR Research, or MMR stands for Mathematical Market Research, which is a horrible piece of branding, but I should have known better perhaps. But anyway, it's stuck with us, and it's turned out to serve as well. And we really, my wife and I started the business really, and that was in our house in Benson in Oxfordshire. And we started with a borrowed computer, borrowed printer in our back bedroom. And if you fast forward to 2021, we now employ over 600 people, and we have offices or in 14 different countries. And it's all to do with market research, brand development, product development, and all the research activities that go with that. And we work for some of the biggest multinationals in the world. We do a lot of healthcare research as well. And I suppose that's where I cut my teeth a little bit on the idea of whiskey brands. And so in 2007, my wife and I decided that we would like to do something different. We didn't want to stop our business, MMR. I was there all day today, so I definitely haven't stopped it. But we wanted to try and have another string to our bow, and we wanted to invest in something we thought would be meaningful, and we very much wanted to invest in something in Scotland. And I, as I mentioned, I don't think I've ever left Scotland, not really, and I wanted to do something there. And I'm a real believer in the importance of industry and particularly manufacturing industry to the economy of any country, any nation. It has to be sort of sustainable manufacturing. And the only thing I thought I knew anything about was either brewing or distilling. I knew quite a lot about the front end of it, the cereal technology aspect of it, and cereal chemistry. So, and I knew a fair bit by this time about the branding of spirits and beers and things like that. And then the bit in the middle, which I knew less about, I had a very close friend, a guy called Jim Swan, and he's sadly no longer with us. But Jim was really the guy who knew just about everything about whiskey. So, if you like, the three of us, we bought Annandale Distillery. Jim was just a consultant. Actually, to get the chronology of that right, we bought Annandale Distillery as a wreck in 2007, and then I called Jim and said, I've done something really stupid. I've got this wreck distillery. He said, well, you probably should have called me beforehand, but now that you've done it, let's see how we can take it forward. So in 2007, we bought Annandale, and I have to say it was one of these very strange circumstances. I had no intention of doing this, but we heard about Annandale Distillery in a book called Scotch Mist, and there's a lovely play in words, MISSED, and it was about distilleries that had been shut down and seemingly gone forever. It was written by a guy called Brian Townsend. I think he worked for one of the Dundee newspapers, and we were kind of reading it, and I read about the distilleries in the south of Scotland, realised that pretty much at that point they'd all gone. There had been 4. Bladnoch was kind of at that stage, and it seemed to be in its death throes. And Annandale, it looked to me as I read through it that it had been demolished, but I actually misread it, and it hadn't been. And I eventually found that most of the buildings existed. So Teresa, my wife, and I went up there and we had a look at the place. It's one of these strange coincidences in life. You look at the place, and it was we'd actually driven up from Oxford, and it was absolutely howling a gale and pouring with rain. And we got to the border, and the weather just changed, and it became beautiful and sunny and bright. And we arrived at Annandale Distillery. I never knew where it was until this point, which is weird because that's where I come from, but I didn't know where it was. And we looked at the place, and it was just beautiful. And Teresa said to me, look, if you want to do this, you got to do it now, because if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. And so that's how Annandale Distillery came about. And I think, part of it was serendipitous, part of it was emotion, and the other part of it was a real desire to bring Scotch whisky production back to the south of Scotland, because there's no reason why the Highlands, and Speyside in particular, should have the lion's share of the Scotch whisky industry. And goodness sake, in Dumfriesshire, we have the weather. We certainly have the rain to provide us with plenty of water. And actually, it's a fantastic climate for maturing whisky. Now, Jim Swan used to say to us that where the old bonded warehouse is, Annandale Distillery is possibly one of the best places in the world for maturing whisky, because it sits in a hollow, it's damp, it never gets too hot and it never gets terribly cold. And he says it's just perfect. And hopefully he was right. Well, I believe he was actually. So there we are. So it all came about kind of serendipitously, never really properly planned. But once we'd taken the step, of course, there was no turning back. Really, we had to go. And 7.5 years later, an awful lot of money, quite a bit of heartache, but a huge amount of fun and interest later, Annandale Distillery started producing again, and there we are. So we make two types of whiskey at Annandale. We make unpeated whiskey, and we make peated whiskey. And because it's in the south of Scotland, people tend to think, oh, Lowland whiskey, yeah, it's going to be sort of a bit peely-wally and not very characterful. I've even heard it described, and this makes me cringe even saying it, as a ladies' whiskey, and what a horrible expression, or as an aperitif whiskey, all of which is just absolute rubbish. And because historically, south of Scotland produced peaty whiskies, because let's face it, we live in a peat bog, and what else would you use to dry your barley after you've malted it? So we discovered that Annandale produced peated whiskey as well. So we make peated and unpeated whiskey, and we also, having a background in branding.
Before you go into that detail, and I think maybe I've interrupted you too early, because I was going to ask you, what are your brands, and how would folk be able to recognise them?
Well, it's interesting because everything we've done at Annandale, we've decided to try and do a bit differently, not just for the sake of it or because we think other people are doing it wrong, but because there are an awful lot of single malt Scotch whisky distilleries in Scotland. There are over 100. And, when we decided to do this project, it was, does Scotland really need another distillery? And I think the answer to that was probably no, it didn't really. Does the south of Scotland need a distillery? Oh, it most certainly does, and most certainly did at that time, because there were none. And why shouldn't there be a distillery there? But we still wanted to do things a little bit differently. And if we'd followed convention, we'd have called it Annandale Single Malt Scotch Whisky. But we thought, well, that would just add to the pack. It would add, just add another layer of busyness to an already busy fixture, and we had to do something different. So we wanted to take the two styles of whiskey that we were going to produce and do something very different with them. And I suppose in marketing terms, it's called sub-branding. So we decided to call our peated whiskey Man of Sword after King Robert the Bruce, who was the 7th Lord of Annandale, and our distillery is actually built in what would have been Bruce's land. And our unpeated whiskey is called Man of Words, after, of course, Robert Burns. And Robert Burns, as most folk will know, ended his life as an excise man in the Dumfries area, but he was definitely very busy in Annan and at the foot or the mouth of the River Annan, where he was often found checking cargoes of rum from Antigua and places like that. So Burns has a very strong association with Annan, and he allegedly wrote the Deals of War with the Excisemen whilst lodging in Annan. So we thought we had these two, phenomenal Scottish icons. So we went Man of Sword for Bruce because he lived and died with a sword, and Man of Words for Burns, because of course that's what he is. And you might have spotted that they're anagrams of each other as well. So that's what we were trying to do, and I think it's worked very well. At first, I thought, will people ever refer to them as that? But that's all ever people refer to them as now, and it makes a very clear distinction. But it makes people also think that somehow or other they belong together, and they do, because the core of it is a character that let's call it Annandale character, and it's a kind of orchard fruit, quite sweet, and there's other fruits in there as well, character in the whiskey. It's quite unique to Annandale, and it's exactly what Jim Swan designed into it. He set about to do that for us by the way he very skillfully designed the whole plant for the distillery and how it should be run. So I take no personal credit for that. It's down to the late great Jim Swan, and you know, and that's where we are now. We sell Manor Words and Manor Sword.
Excellent. So, how do the public respond to a peaty whiskey? Very much, in my experience, it's a bit of an acquired taste.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, from my own personal experience, what I found was I naturally started on the less challenging unpeated whiskies, but I quite quickly got into peated whiskey, and I actually got to the kind of extreme end of peated whiskey. So I tried Lafroig and I tried Ardbeg and Lagavulin and things like that, and of course I enjoyed them, but they're quite extreme whiskies. And what we wanted to do was produce a more subtle peated whiskey, and there's no reason why peated whiskey couldn't be produced in the south of Scotland, because we actually know historically that that's what it would have been. But I had to somehow make them different from, let's say, Islay peated whiskies, because Islay do peated whiskies extremely well, so there's no point in trying to copy them. So we went for something a bit more subtle, and it's to do with we buy our peated malt from just north of Inverness. So if you like, the peat that's used to kiln the malted barley is different from what it would be in Islay, and then the way that we run the stills is different as well. So we end up with a kind of softer peatiness that's not so clear on the nose, but quite distinct on the palate. And it seems to go down very well with peated whiskey drinkers, but I think also it's maybe not quite as challenging as if you like, the extremists, and therefore it's a bit more open to all comers as well. So that's why we did peated whiskey. But Jim always told us that, you know, whilst that is definitely the right thing to be producing at Annandale, the market is still with unpeated whiskey, and he advised us to try and create a unique unpeated whiskey that somehow would have something in common with the peated whiskey. And we actually did quite a big study. I'm very lucky having a market research company, because it allowed me to look at the sensory characteristics of a whole range of different single malt Scotch whiskies, and we were able to choose a part, if you can think of them all mapped out on a piece of paper according to their flavour. We were looking for a credible gap in the peated whiskey map, and we found one, and that's where the idea of having this peatiness blended with fruitiness as orchard fruits came from. And then when you looked over to the other side of the map, which had the unpeated whiskies in it, fortunately for us, there was a gap there as well that kind of matched. It's kind of like the opposite of the peated one. So we got two whiskies, one peated and one unpeated, that have like a common core or a common heart, and that meant we could make them in the same plant. And that again was that at least that part of the story was definitely by design, if the first part wasn't.
Well, there are many of our Burns Club colleagues, not only in our club but around the Burns world, who have followed your journey from some fairly light whiskies to the peated end of the spectrum, and are still there.
Good. Well, that's good. So I don't know if you're aware, Dougie and Jim, but we've Annandale Distilleries just formed a partnership with the Robert Burns World Federation. So I think those who are involved with the federation will be hearing quite a lot more about Annandale whiskies in the next, well, certainly for the next 12 months, but hopefully for a whole lot longer than that. And you know, that really excites me, because connecting with Burnsians around the world is something I wish to do. So not just from a marketing and sales point of view, but it just feels like a fraternity that is good to be part of, both personally and with our whiskey.
Excellent. Before we move on to talk about Burns in more detail, what about the tourism side of the business? How did that come about, and what are your plans in that area?
Well, we always wanted Annandale Distillery to be a tourist attraction, because there's a lot of reasons for it, but one of them is I've always wanted to share with other people the sort of journey that we went on. And I suppose one of my longer term ambitions, perhaps when I've retired from my main business, but one of my longer term ambitions would be to sort of run a whiskey academy, because I mean there's lots of them, I know all that, but just, if you like, my own version of one, because I'm a scientist, and I think there's quite a lot I can say and tell people about making whiskey and make it fun for them, and have people come to the distillery and work with the production team in actually making a whiskey. We do a little bit of that at the minute, and people seem to really enjoy it. But I'd like to do a bit more of that. So I always envisaged that we'd have people around us, and certainly that was my wife's point of view as well, that, you know, we need to share this with other people. It's not just for us. And I think also that south of Scotland, then, and you know, still now actually, needs more tourist attractions, things that genuinely interest people. I mean, it's a lovely place. It's a great place to come from. It's a great place to live. But there need to be, if you like, physical tourist attractions beyond the beautiful topography of the place. So we felt that we could, you know, do something like that. And it's proved to be very busy, actually. And crikey, the last 2021 tourist season was just unbelievable. We were absolutely rammed, you know, July, August and September, and even well into October. I've never seen the place so busy. It was really hectic, and more people staying at home. But you know, also just before the lockdown started in 2020, we had our brown signs installed on the M74. So if you're going up and down M74, you'll see them now. And that's made quite a big difference, actually. It took us a long time to get them. And I'll not even tell you how much they cost us to put there. It cost us a fortune. Please don't think that the government does that out of the kindness of their heart. They don't. But it's been a worthy investment, because I think that's, a lot of people say, oh, we didn't know you were there. And so they've turned off the motorway. Maybe not the first time of passing, but the second or third time they pass in. And hopefully they have a nice time, either just having a cup of tea and a cake or something like that, or getting fully immersed in the distillery. And we get a lot of people coming back, and it's a stopping off place for a lot of people and a meeting place for a lot of people. So we get a lot of visitors now, and that delights me. During the lockdown, you know, we got a lot done at the distillery when we didn't have to worry about people coming on site. So that was perhaps the silver lining, but it just felt that the place was dead, and none of us enjoyed that. It's so much nicer when there's people about, and we love having people about. So, you know, it's good for the soul, I think. So yeah, and we're busy.
Excellent. Well, we've talked a bit about Burns in relation to his role as an exciseman, and obviously we know that Burns had a great connection with Annan. But there's another bigger connection, or a more iconic connection that you've got involved with. Maybe when we're talking about your interest in Burns, you can tell us a bit about that project, and I'll get Jim to lead the question on that one.
Yes, I'll gladly tell you about that.
Yeah, David, just before we go there, could you, I mean, you're a Dumfries boy, how did you get started with Burns in the first place?
Well, I suppose, you know, as a kid, you're pretty complacent about all this stuff, or I was anyway. And I just obviously knew about Burns. There's so many Burns associations in Dumfries, but I wasn't really interested until I went to Dumfries Academy, actually. And when I was at the academy, there was both Burns and Shakespeare were on offer. And I mean, I might offend some people here, but I'm sorry, I cannot get on with Shakespeare. I just can't. I never, Jim, stop looking at me like that. I can't get on with Shakespeare at all. But Burns, you know, even as a young teenager, the kind of way the guy, the narratives, the way he mixed up words in English and Scots in the same sentence to or the same line, sorry, to communicate something evocative and beautiful. You know, and that's been with me all my life. I mean, I'm not a hardcore Burnsian, or I wasn't, but I'm getting there now. but that's, so it was really just at school, and it, when I got very involved in my academic career and then my business career, I didn't really have time for very much of it. But it started to come back to me in a big way when I got this dog. He was a rescue dog. He was a great big Rottweiler, actually, and he was a rescue dog, and he was a bit lame and couldn't walk very fast, and it all got a bit dull taking him out for a walk. So I thought, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn Tam O'Shanter when I'm walking this dog, and so myself and Max the Rottweiler learned Tam O'Shanter, and I pretty much got it word perfect. And then Max died, unfortunately, and the walk stopped, and it all slipped from my mind. So I can remember a fair bits of it, but I could not do it from beginning to end or anything like it without some serious rehearsal. And it was really Tam O'Shanter that got me interested again. But I mean, there's so much more to Burns than just Tam O'Shanter. He's not just Tam O'Shanter, but I have to say that is my favourite poem by miles. And you know, the clincher for me, really, in all of this was Teresa and I went to Ellisland Farm, and you know, of course, Ellisland Farm was Burns's farm on the banks of the River Nith, and you know, it's a very underdeveloped site, or it was, and just beautiful. And it's just like as if Burns had left it, and you know, and walked away. And it's partly it's very similar to that. The way it is now is very similar to as it would have been in Burns's time. And we were speaking to the old guy there who was a sort of curator, and he said, "Oh, why don't you just go for a walk up towards Friars Cars?" And that's where Burns used to walk. And he said, "Oh, did you know that this is where Burns wrote Tam O'Shanter?" And I tell you what, the hairs in the back of my neck stuck out like knitting needles. I found that so emotive. And I still do. I still go to Ellisland, and I still go to the path, and I still think of him writing Tam O'Shanter and how all these words came to him so quickly. I mean, the genius of the man. And I think Tam O'Shanter, to me, captures it beautifully. But I wouldn't want to forget some of the other stuff, some of the feisty other stuff that he's written as well. But Tam O'Shanter's the one for me. And I'm going to one day, if my memory will allow me, to try and remember it all again and rehearse it. And in fact, I was actually, today's been quite an interesting day to me, because I spent the afternoon with the actor James Cosmo, who has played a lot of roles. He's that's his stage name. His name is James Copeland, but you'll have seen him in things like Outlaw King and so forth. And he's a great Burnsian as well. And he's going to come to the Globe Inn, and between us, somehow or other, we're going to try and knock out a version of Tam O'Shanter. So that's this afternoon's plans. Whether we're going to try and do it before Burns night, but we'll see. He's a very busy man, so but it's a nice idea, and he's a lovely guy as well, for those of you who know him. So very entertaining. So we'll give that a try. Anyway, the story, going back to the Globe, again, it's just not what most people would think. I didn't, therefore, having this passion for Burns, go and say, right, I must own the Globe. I mean, it was completely the opposite. The last idea I had in my mind was to own a pub. I really didn't want to own a pub. But at that time, when it first came across my bows, I had just finished the distillery. I was up to here in debt almost. You know, the distillery was a very expensive project, and I had to really push the boat out to do it. You know, we had been terribly busy. We had just got production started, and I had a conversation with Gordon McKerrow, who, you know, from the McKerrow family, who owned it from, I think it was 1937. And I'd known Gordon for a long time, but I particularly knew Maureen McKerrow, his wife, because she was in my class at Dumfries Academy. So we kind of kept in touch over the years. And basically Gordon said to me, would I be interested in any way in the Globe because of its relationship with Man of Words. So I had to say to Gordon that, I'm sorry, Gordon, my head's full and my pockets are empty. I can't deal with this at the minute. but anyway, we met and socially and otherwise and conversed with Gordon and Maureen over the years, and then eventually, actually, it was Teresa again, my wife, who said, "Look, why don't we buy the Globe Inn?" Because we knew that Gordon and Maureen wanted out, and one of the attractions, I think, for Gordon picking on me or pinpointing me on this one was because I think, is it old Matthew McCarrow, who had bought it in the first place, had kind of made the statement, and not in his deathbed, I don't think, but getting towards that he didn't want the Globe Inn to get into the hands of a foreigner. And I think by a foreigner, he meant from somebody outside Dumfries. So I suppose in most respects, I qualify for not being a foreigner. And actually, Teresa, my wife's heritage, her grandmother was Mary Thompson, also from Blantyre as well. So another damn Thomson, Jim. so
all over the place.
Oh, we're all Jack Thompson's bairns, and he was busy boy. We decided that we would buy it, and we thought about what we would do with it. One of the things, I mean, the real passion was to save the Burns rooms and to do something with the Burns rooms that would return them to, we didn't want to make a museum. We want them to make them rooms that are lived in and people can use, but we wanted to make them a bit more authentic as to how they would have been back in Burns's time. And that's the reason why we bought the Globe Inn. But then we realized that, well, if these rooms are going to have any life after us, we're not going to live forever, we'd have to, it has to be a viable business. It's the same model as the distillery. Teresa and I call these our legacy projects because, we're not going to sell them. The most important thing for us is they eventually become profitable so they can stand on their own 2 feet without us remaining overly involved financially, although we want to be involved emotionally for as long as we possibly can. So the Globe has to go through that process as well. And it's too small to, do high volumes of beer every night. And there's other pubs in Dumfries, big places that sell beer at, incredibly low prices. So, we can't compete on that basis. So we had to find another basis for finding a future for the Globe. And we decided that it would be more as a restaurant and reasonably high-end restaurant. I hesitate to call it fine dining because that sounds a bit poncy, if I could use that expression. But we wanted to make it a little bit different from the fare that people can otherwise get in Dumfries. But we always wanted it to remain a pub. So the Snug bar in the Globe, for those of you who know it, is, I think it's how we wanted it to be. It's barely changed since the McCarrow days and probably from the people before that. But there was a few things we needed to do actually to make it look a bit more authentic than it had become. And the Snug is still a great place to have a drink. We've made it more of a whiskey bar than a beer bar. So we're partners to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and we've got, I think, nearly 70 of their bottlings in the Snug. So, people are coming there to enjoy single cask, single malts, and of course that would hopefully include Annandale as well. But what was the main bar is now a restaurant as well. But certainly lockdown was a killer, of course. But we're lucky we were able to support the business through all of that, and we reopened again, and the business is steadily built up. In fact, it was my birthday last Friday and it was too busy for them to give us a table. But I wasn't annoyed because we need the business. So that was okay. So it's doing very well now. But the purpose is really to welcome Burnsians from all over the world. Come to the Globe. Come and have a pint. Come and have a whiskey. Come and have some beer if you want. Come and see the Burns rooms. And I would say the same to all the people in Dumfries and locally. you know, come and see the burns rooms, come and have a drink, it's fine, you know, and if you want to eat, you can eat. But it's open to all. And if you love burns, you're even more welcome.
How do you make that part of it work? Do you do it in the form of a guided tour, or do people just wander around?
Well, no, we don't like people to wander around. No, we don't do that. You know, of course, the wonderful Jane Brown, and Jane, as many people will know, was the landlady in the Globe for about 20 years, I think it was, and she had retired, you know, some time ago, and I think that's probably the reason why Gordon and Maureen O'Carroll wanted out themselves, because without Jane there, you know, well, I think she was greatly missed, and of course it all fell back on them to run the pub, and obviously it's quite a commitment for them. So Jane had retired. Anyway, I knew Jane socially quite well by this time, and when she realised we'd bought the Globe, she said, "Well, if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." So he said, "Well, funnily enough, there is. You know, come and tell us all you know about the Globe." And so she said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a guided tour of your pub," which was very handy. And she gave us a lot of background, and of course it was delivered with great good humour, yeah, on all the stories that you know very well, including the fruity ones, and it was a great deal of fun. So she's played quite a big role in, you know, reinstating the place. And Jane does quite a lot of tours, so she doesn't work for us. Jane doesn't want to work for us. She's her own woman now, and she enjoys being herself and doing what she wants when she wants, but she's fantastically willing to come in and genuine Burnsy, and she delights in showing them round. So Jane's incredibly helpful. We do some ourselves, where we're training some of the guides that we have at Annandale Distillery. During the course of the spring, they'll be getting educated in Burns and Burns's life at the Globe, and so we'll be doing more of that. But it is, at the moment, it's by appointment. But actually, what we're hoping is that people will turn up at the Globe, you know, particularly tourists, but anyone for that matter, and say, "Is it possible for us to see around the Burns rooms?" And we will gladly do so. So that's how we plan to do it. We can't let people just wander through it. There's too many artifacts and things like that. So, and I think also to appreciate it, you've got to hear it.
Yeah, so it sounds tremendous. Good,
and you know, I hope one day that we'll catch you down there, Dougie and Jim. I'm sure you've been already, but
I'm sure you will. Our colleague Bobby Jess has got a standing order for us to come down and do the complete Dumfries tour.
Yes, you will. I think I can recommend that, because I heard Bobby Jess doing all of Tam O'Shanter and sitting in Burns's chair in Burns's house, and that was something to delight in. And he was word perfect. He did not make a single slip. I was so jealous.
Yeah. Just speaking of that, I mean, the Burns conference is coming to Dumfries next year.
Yeah, the Robert Burns World Federation conference. Yeah,
the 2022, and we're obviously, we've already spoken to Bobby with a view to doing Dumfries tours, and spoke to Jane to perhaps speak with yourself to, you know, in order to get particularly the Canadians and Americans and the people from overseas to get them a wee view of the Globe as well. Wouldn't it?
Oh yes, Jim. I mean, this is really music to my ears, and you know, it's not about business as far as I'm concerned. It's about getting people into the Globe and to see what there is and to appreciate it, and to particularly learn about Burns and Dumfries, and also Dumfries during the Burns era, which was kind of the theme of the presentation I gave at the World Federation in the autumn there up in Greenock. So that's what I want or Renfrew, sorry. That's what I want to happen. So I'll be working with my colleagues, Henry Kearney and Alan Beck and so forth, up in the Federation, to see what we can do and see how we can work together to do something really special for the visitors to the Federation's conference in Dumfries. So we've just bought actually a building adjacent to the Globe. I don't know if you know the court, there's a little courtyard outside the Globe. It's sort of back off the high street through a close, and there's a little courtyard. And there's another building that makes up, one of the sides of the courtyard. And we've just bought that. And the idea we've got behind that is really to make it like the heart of the Burns Quarter in Dumfries, and really try and bring that more to life. And having the Federation conference in Dumfries in 2022 is a phenomenal incentive for us to pull our fingers out and get that done really well. So hopefully we can contribute fulsomely to the whole Burns experience for the visitors to the conference.
Talking about the Federation, you're involved with the Federation now. Would you mind explaining to people out there what your involvement is now?
Yes. I suppose it was maybe in about May or June this year, I got contacted by the president of the Federation, Mark, and he asked me if I would be interested in becoming an ambassador for the Robert Burns World Federation. And I wasn't sure I knew exactly what that meant. So I obviously spoke to Jane, and she said, well, I think this is something that you should do. I secretly think Jane might have put him up to it, but in fact, I'm pretty sure she did. But anyway, and she said, I think it's something you should do because of your own interest in Burns and being from Dumfries and having the Globe. I think it'd be the right thing for you and for the Globe and everything. So I willingly accepted it. It's a challenge because one of the things that Henry Kearney and Alan Beck said to me at the time was, look, we're a federation of old men, and we with all due respect to the three of us in this conversation, but we're not a federation of old men, and we want to get some younger people in. How can you help us? And they were quite keen because of my background in branding and marketing and so forth to do, to get me involved to do that. And also I think there are other ways that I can help the Federation just recruit more members, just get out there in front of people who are interested in Robert Burns, and that's what I'm setting out to do. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. I was very honoured to be asked. Actually, I didn't quite realise what they were suggesting at first, but when the kind of full magnitude of it became apparent to me, I was more than delighted to accept. And well, we'll see where it goes. And the other there's two other ambassadors. There's Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who's the Chancellor of Heriot-Watt University. And a great brewing man as well, so he's involved, and there's Liam McIlvanney, who's out in the University of Otago. I don't remember the name of the department that he's in, but it's something to do with Scottish studies, or Scottish and Irish studies, or Celtic studies, or something. And so he's obviously flying the flag for Burns on the other side of the world. But he's Ayrshire born, as far as I know, and I think he's a very famous father as well. So
only a bit,
something like that. Anyway, because he's a fantastic crime writer in his own right as well. So I'm in very august company, and I hope I can live up to it. But I'm bubbling over with enthusiasm for what to be part of it. And it's just, in my case, it's time, because I still have a day job that I enjoy, and I'm not ready to retire yet. So,
we did a podcast with Sir Jeff, and it was really, really fascinating. If you get the chance to look at it,
I haven't seen that one now.
And he's promised to do another one with us, because Jim forgot to ask him about his cricket career.
He's wonderful. It's a brilliant podcast, I've got to say. They're all extremely good. I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but I thoroughly enjoyed his, because it was one of these unique things in terms of his life history. And he talked about being a cricketer and the bonuses that got him in terms of his life. And I thought myself, we never even spoke to the man about cricket, which is a sport that I absolutely love.
All right.
So I'm only getting back on.
Yeah. Jim will do most of the talking on that one because I don't understand cricket.
No, it's not something I know a lot about either. I enjoy this. Is it the 2020 series where they have 20 overs or something like that? That's fast and furious. I quite enjoy that, but yeah, the 3 or 4 day test matches.
See, that for me is where the game is. It's so scientific and it's skillful and it's just wonderful to watch.
Well, I like rugby.
Oh goodness!
So.
I wish I'd never mentioned it. let's get back to Burns.
Yes, why not?
Oh dear. What about in terms of the Globe? Obviously, the Dumfries House Club are there. You have a relationship with them?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's a casual relationship. I suppose many years ago, I think it was possibly Gordon McCarroll's father. It might even have been his grandfather. Had granted them a room there that has become the Burns House Club room, and Teresa and I are very happy to extend that during our era as well. I know a few of them a little bit anyway. There's a David Miller, who's the current secretary now. He's my class at Dumfries Academy, so know him pretty well, and I know a few of the other stalwarts that have been there for a while. So, but of course, lockdown happened pretty much after we had closed the Globe for a while we refurbished it because it needed a lot of work, particularly in kitchens and toilets and so forth. So we couldn't keep it open, so we closed it down, and we reopened right at the end of 2019, and we had a kind of season at the beginning of 2020, and of course we all know what happened in March 2020. So and of course the House Club hasn't really, the members of the House Club haven't really been there since then. But they're very welcome to come back any time, of course. But they're not really back there fulsomely yet. But I think we're pretty close to that. We'll have to see how this next wave pans out. But hopefully, when this is behind us, we can look forward to a much richer relationship and collaboration with them. So I'm delighted that they're there. They're very much part of the Globe's heritage, and as long as I've got breath, that's how it's going to remain.
Can I ask you, did your refurbishment sort of resolve the problem of the secret room?
The secret room, well, not really. Well, it didn't because we haven't changed the structure in any way. The changes we made were mainly internal, and they were mainly in what was the old bar, and where Jane Brown's flat was actually above the main bar is now our loos, our main kitchen, and a private dining area, which is certainly a very nice space for having family or group events. So we did it was a lot of work, but we didn't physically change the outside a lot. But where the House Club meet in their room, there's a kind of flying freehold there. And one of the things I've not quite got to the bottom of yet, but I really want to, is there's a building that's been built in front of the Globe. So it's actually on the high street, and it sort of meshes into the Globe in a very sort of untidy fashion. And I'm sure that there must have been another part of the Globe that's been demolished, and that building's been built where some of the Globe was. And I would just like to know a bit more about that. So, but the hidden room, the story, as far as Jane tells me, and I think Gordon McCarroll probably told me the same story, was that the old Mr. McCarroll had the window cleaners in, and he was getting charged per window. And so the window cleaner came back and he said, well, it'll be this many windows times so much, Mr. McCarroll, so it's such and such. And he says, oh, no, you've overcounted. I don't have that many windows. He says, you do. And I said, no, he said, I don't. And what they found was there's this door, and it had been blocked off. But actually, when you opened the door, it went into this other room, and that's now the House Club's room. So that's how they found that room. but that bit of the building is a bit weird, and I can see how that would easily have happened. And I presume that it had just not been used for decades and decades, and possibly, well, not in the Macquarie era. So you're probably going back to before the 1937. So, but anyway, that's the story, and I'm wondering if there are any others. I could do with a bit more room.
It just out of interest, exactly where within the building is the restaurant part?
It's what was the old bar. If you can remember, so you come in the front door, you pass the snug with its sliding door on the left, and then you come into the main bar. So the main bar itself, where we serve the drinks, is pretty much exactly as it was. And then as you go further down, right at the back of the room were the toilets, and they really needed refurbished. So we took them out and put them up the stairs, and we just effectively put the restaurant into what was the bar and restaurant before. And also we've got a very nice long table situated in what was the toilets, but I can assure you there's no smell. So, they've been scrubbed to within an inch of their life, plastered and so forth. No, and we've tried not to make it over fussy or anything like that. And I think it's got quite a nice atmosphere. Teresa, my wife's very keen on that sort of thing and trying to get that right. You know, it's very easy to just go tartan and then it all looks cliched and not very nice. So we've kind of not done that. But, you know, quite a lot of the stuff, we actually found when we peeled the wallpaper off that it had beautiful wooden paneling. So we stripped all that. We stripped it back, not completely, but to the point where we got to the old varnish and just kind of sealed it and left it. And it looks pretty nice, actually. And put a nice carpet on the floor. And the tables that are there are the original tables, but we just we took the floorboards out of Jane's flat because they needed to come out, and we made tabletops out of them. So there's still quite a lot of the old Globe down there. And you've got some new chairs and upholstered them, or they're old chairs actually. We reupholstered them, and that's how it is. And it's warm, it's cozy, it's comfortable. There's a lot of, you know, burns there, but hopefully not overdone. We've got a lovely mural on the back wall of a scene from, well, an imaginary scene from Tam O'Shanter, whilst he's getting Fu and Unca happy. And one of the characters in the scene is, of course, Jane Brown, distributing wine or ale or whatever it is to some of to Tam, I suppose. But so we've got that, and we had there was 3 windows that were blocked off, and it didn't make the place look very nice. So we had stained glass windows made that depict 3 scenes from Tam O'Shanter. You know, Tam riding into air. Tam coming across old Nick at the old Alloa's old haunted kirk, and then I'm getting chased by the witchy, the hellish legion, as it were, over the Brigadoon, trying to make the keystone or the brig, and so we've got stained glass windows in there, and we've backlit them, and they're quite a feature actually. People really stop and look at that. But you know, one of the, I suppose, to me, maybe the second, well, I'll say the third most important artifact in the Globe is the letter that Burns wrote to his publisher, George Thomson, in Edinburgh in April of 1796, you know, so a few months before he died. And he was introducing Mrs. Hislop, who was the landlady of the Globe at that time. And he was introducing her because she was going to pick up something on behalf of Burns. Actually, it was a seal of some sort on behalf of Burns, and he introduced her as Mrs. Hislop of the Globe, where my friend Clark and I have had many a merry squeeze, and it's been his house for many a long time, and where he and Clark had many a merry squeeze, or something was to that effect. It's all written in this letter, so it very much ties Burns into the Globe, and I like that. And it begins. You might like this, Jim. It begins, "Alas, my dear Thompson." And that was another prickly hair on the back of your neck job for me, because, you know, again, it's nothing to do with me really, but it's just the fact that it was Thomson. So that was quite nice. The other two things in the globe that I think are very important artifacts are the chair, of course, and its situation in Burns's house itself. But of course, the most important one are his etched window panes up in what we call the bedchamber. You know, there were in fact 5. 3 were given, sold, whatever, to the Birthplace Museum, I believe, in the mid 1800s, but 2 remain. And I think in 2010, Jane tells me, which was the 400th anniversary of the Globe, so it was started in 1610. So in 2010, they went back to the Birthplace Museum and asked if they could have their etchings back, as it were. And I think they were politely told to get lost. But what they did allow us to do, or allow the McKerris to do at the time, was to get them copied. So we've got all 5 of the poems back in the window frames, the 2 originals and the 3 that were sent off to Alloa. So, but these 2 panes to me are just so important, because there's no question they were done by Burns, and that's a fantastically authentic artifact to have in the building. And it's always something that, you know, they're quite difficult to see, so we're going to have to try and find a way of lighting them a bit more effectively, so that, you know, people who come to visit can actually read them a bit more easily. But that's another job for the list.
Fantastic. David, we're unfortunately running out of time. Can I just ask you one last question? You told us a bit about your Dumfries ancestors, and where they'd worked and businesses they'd had. Do you know if Bobby Jess has managed to include that extra bit of dialogue in his tour, so that he can relate these statues or plaques or whatever directly to you and the Globe?
No, I didn't know that, actually. I didn't know that.
I don't know whether he has or not, but I think that would be a good thing for him to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've met Bobby a few times, but I've not sat down and talked to him for a wee while. So, not really since lockdown, I suppose. Oh no, he did Tam O'Shanter during, you know, the first release after lockdown, but I haven't talked to him since then. So I need to have a word with him. Because I
just think that would be a fascinating link, to be able to take characters from the past and relate them to the present. I think that'd be tremendous.
Yes, I think it would. I absolutely think it would. And I obviously need to speak to Bobby, because one of the things I'd really like to get right for my own satisfaction is to have a more accurate understanding of Robert Burns' life in Dumfries, to have more detail, put some work into it. Now, I know that a lot of people have done this, but I've just not had the opportunity to really read through this stuff and harvest it. But I think Bobby could probably tell me a lot about that. And the other thing I'd like to understand more about is how Dumfries would have been during Burns's era, because in some respects it would have been very different, and in other respects it would have been very similar. I mean, there's a nice painting in Burns's house in the Globe, painted. Well, it's a copy of a painting by William Ewart Lockhart, and it's of Burns's funeral, and in the background you see the mid steeple in Dumfries, and you know it has not changed. Of course, it hasn't changed, but it just shows you that there are elements of similarity, and you can come out of the Globe close and look up the High Street. You know, not forgetting the modern signage. For all the world, it could be the same place, you know, and that's a nice thing to behold. I'd love to see. One of the things, of course, they did eventually was put the River Nith in a channel, and that's caused all untold problems since then. But they put it in a channel, shoved it over to the Maxwellton side, and what we now call the White Sands, of course, is just a big open piece of roadway with lots of parking in it. And I'd love to try and find what the White Sands was like before they they made it into a channel, because in Burns's era, you had they'd have these little flat bottom boats, sailing boats that would just beach in the mud, and when the tide went out, and then they would load and unload with their wares, and off they'd go again. Of course, perfect for smuggling, but and I'd just like to know more about that. So I mean, I could spend probably the rest of my life researching that, and maybe when the time does come, I'll be able to spend a wee bit more time doing that. But Bobby Jess, I feel, is a great source of such information.
Excellent.
So I'll be tapping him up.
So much history and heritage and so many stories. But in the meantime, thanks for telling us your story about your life with Robert Burns. Thanks very much, David.
Well, Dougie and Jim, it's been an absolute delight. I was wondering how we were going to fill an hour, but I realise now that I just talk far too much. and 1 hour could, but I've enjoyed talking to you guys as well. It's I think you embody what I think is important in Burns. So it's been my honour to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much.